In recent years, Ukraine has relied on local militia groups to bolster its defenses against pro-Russian separatists, but some are reportedly tied to Ukrainian far-right political movements and include neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other fascists in their fighting ranks. Even though they are a minority, their involvement has empowered Putin to spread the false message that the goal of his invasion is what he calls denazification. This despite Ukraine's elected government having the support of the U.S. and other Western democracies. According to the U.S. government, a small but growing number of American extremists have been traveling abroad to fight with far-right militants on both sides of the conflict, and some fear they could return to the U.S. more violent. ABC's David Scott and our investigative team traveled to Ukraine last spring to meet one former U.S. Army soldier accused of doing just that.
I still have my moments. Sometimes I'll just break out and cry.
For almost 4 years now, Angie Crowder has been waiting for her sister's killers to be brought to justice.
They ripped my guts out. We all want answers.
Gunned down in the middle of the night, the murders of Angie's sister Dina Lorenzo and Dina's husband Danny have since become entangled with the crisis in Ukraine.
I want their story told. These were two fun-loving people, and their life was snuffed.
After growing up on a farm in Oklahoma, Dina joined the Marines, where she served honorably before moving to Florida to serve fellow vets.
She worked at the Veterans Center in Tampa, and she helped vets. If she seen a homeless vet, she'd give him a card and say, "Call me, I will help you."
Dina married fellow veteran Serafin Danny Lorenzo and lived a quiet life until the night of April 9th, 2018.
I tried calling her that Monday night.
And she didn't call you back?
No.
That was unusual.
Yeah. I had this really strange feeling. Kind of like when you know tornadoes are close.
Yeah.
My hair stands up on the back of my neck.
To make ends meet, Danny sometimes bought and sold goods online. That evening, investigators say, he responded to an ad offering several firearms and agreed to meet the seller.
They changed locations on them constantly until they found one that was dark, no cameras, not a lot of lights.
Roughly 40 minutes later, Danny and Dina pulled their red truck into this empty church parking lot and directly into an ambush. Local residents reported a sudden hail of rapid gunfire. And when it stopped, the victim's vehicle was riddled with bullet holes. 63 bullet casings were recovered by police. Dina Lorenzo was shot 11 times. Her husband Danny took 7 rounds.
When you think about your sister's last moments, that must be...
She was scared. I know she had to be, you know?
But it would be more than a year before authorities announced the suspects.
2 former U.S. Army soldiers who were discharged. This is 22-year-old Alex Zweifelhofer and 29-year-old Craig Lang. The two met in the Ukraine fighting in a far-right military group.
And they called me and told me they had good news. They now know who did it. One was in custody, and they're trying to get the other one. I go, "Where's he at?" And she goes, "Ukraine." I go, "Wow, really?"
Last spring, as Russia began remobilizing on Ukraine's border, ABC News traveled to Ukraine and found Craig Lang living openly in Kyiv with his new Ukrainian wife and child. He agreed to sit down with us, but refused to answer any questions about the murders in Florida, in which he denies any involvement.
I can't discuss any of these things, anything about Florida, pretty much anything about my time in the United States in 2018. I can't talk about any of that.
U.S. authorities are trying to extradite Lang to face murder charges, but Lang claims he's a victim of Russian propaganda and U.S. political persecution.
A lot of the media goes around with saying that I'm a right-wing extremist, that I'm, a Nazi or any of these things, and I feel that I'll be persecuted as being a right-wing extremist or a far-right person, even though I'm not.
You're saying that the extradition request by the U.S. is really not about the case that the government alleges.
Yeah. I believe that the United States government intends to prosecute me and other veterans of this conflict here for our service in Ukraine.
Lang is among the reportedly growing number of Americans who have gone to fight for far-right paramilitary organizations in Ukraine. During Russia's 2014 invasion in Crimea, Ukraine's army was in disarray and turned for help to civilian-formed volunteer battalions, some of them tied to fringe far-right political parties.
We are starting to see racially motivated violent extremists connecting with like-minded individuals overseas online, certainly.
FBI Director Christopher Wray has repeatedly warned about Ukraine's far-right militias' appeal to U.S. domestic extremists and the possibility that they could return to the U.S. more radical and violent.
И для этого мы будем стремиться к демилитаризации и денацификации Украины.
Putin chose to falsely claim Ukraine's far right is not a minority fringe, but actually controls the government, using this lie as a pretext for war, claiming he's trying to rid the country of Nazis, despite the fact that Ukraine's elected president is Jewish. And Russia has its own extremist militias fighting alongside Russian-backed separatists in Ukraine, including the Russian Imperial Movement, which has cultivated ties with American neo-Nazis and reportedly offered to train white nationalists at the far-right rally in Charlottesville.
One important thing to understand about white power and militant right groups is that they are fundamentally opportunistic. So when we have a major sort of point of tension, like we're seeing in the Ukraine right now, it's very, very likely that actors will exploit that tension.
Lang first arrived in Ukraine around 2015. His 6-year U.S. Army infantry career had come to an end after he went AWOL from his Texas base armed and drove 1,800 miles to North Carolina, where he was arrested for brandishing a gun near his ex-wife's house, according to local police.
Did you leave the base and go AWOL intending to harm her?
No. So I left the base. So I did go leave to clear my head. I did actually go to try to see my son, and there was an altercation with a neighbor in which I was, arrested for assault by pointing a gun.
The Army discharged Lang roughly a year later, but he quickly found a new front line to fight on, in Ukraine, fighting with far-right militias like Right Sector and the Azov Battalion. Militias accused of human rights abuses by Amnesty International, with ties to U.S. domestic extremist groups.
These groups like Adam Laughlin and Rise Above movement are tied to plots of violence back in the United States, sometimes mass casualty plots, and sometimes smaller acts of violence back home.
He explained to Ukraine Today's correspondent Andrei Saplenko his experience fighting the Russian-backed separatist forces.
In 2016, Ukraine Today shadowed Lang as he fought Russian-backed separatists.
I came to Ukraine to come and help the Ukrainian people.
Lang has downplayed the role of white supremacists and neo-Nazis in Ukrainian militias and denies being an extremist himself, but can be seen here in this 2016 photo beside a Right Sector member giving a Heil Hitler salute.
But you're well aware that there are far-right ideologies represented in the mix, right?
I'm going to say that the amount of neo-Nazis or people with extreme views is very, very minimal. Very, very minimal. Is there extremism to a small degree? There might be some extremism, yeah.
There might be.
There might.
You don't accept that that's part of the reality?
No, I don't accept that that's part of a reality here. I mean, I've had black people in my unit serving alongside with me.
Have you also had Nazis?
I've seen people that want to claim that they might be a Nazi, but I don't think that that's their actual ideology.
It was in Ukraine that Lang met co-combatant and alleged co-conspirator Alex Zwiefelhofer, fighting against Russian-backed separatists in disputed territory on the Eastern Front. According to federal prosecutors, the following year they returned to the U.S. together and allegedly hatched the plot to rob and kill the Lorenzos in Florida. Zwiefelhofer has pleaded not guilty. Lang left the U.S. and eventually went back to Ukraine, where he says he now teaches English. During our interview, Lang grew increasingly upset with questions we were asking.
I don't see this conversation going anywhere. I see y'all are on a witch hunt trying to look for Nazis that don't exist.
That's not true, and that's not fair.
And after speaking with us for more than an hour, when we pressed him about racist statements reportedly made by Andriy Beletsky, the former leader of Azov Battalion, Lang ended the interview.
But when you served in Ukraine, he was the commander for Azov, right? He says the nation's mission was to, quote, lead the white races of the world in a final crusade against Semite-led.
I wish you all a good evening. I'm going to go ahead and leave.
Is that not
I'm
true?
sorry, guys. I have no
We've been unable to speak directly with Lang since that day, but prior to Russia's full-scale attack on Kyiv, Lang's lawyer told us he would continue to resist U.S. extradition and may take up arms again in the fight against Russia.
It's disturbing.
We showed Angie Crowder our video of Lang's life prior to the attack on Kyiv, a bitter pill as she waits for justice.
What do you think about that?
Well, I would like to see him come back and stand charges. There's still a danger.
Our thanks to David for that.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.